Well, good afternoon. So glad to have you all joining us as part of Carnival Alumni Reunion Weekend. We wish we could all be with you together on campus as we would in a normal year, but we're so glad to at least be able to have you in our virtual classroom for our virtual discussion today. So thanks so much for joining us. We've got a great alumni panel ahead for you. Just to let you know, this will be recorded, so we will have an opportunity for you to watch this later. We also will have a networking session after this is over with our alumni panelists, so we hope that you'll be able to join us for that as well. There will be an opportunity for questions too, so which you can put in the Q&A box. So let me move ahead now and introduce our speakers. First, it wants to go so fast. First, let me introduce our host for today, Dave Mawhinney from the class of 1990. Dave is what I like to call is the most connected man in the room. Dave is full of energy. He's executive director of the Swartz Center here at the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, and he also heads the Don Jones Center for Entrepreneurship. He's an associate teaching professor. We sometimes think of him as the Energizer Bunny. He works with as a managing director of the Open Field Entrepreneurship Fund. He's a director with I6 Agile Innovation System, and doing many things with many collaborators around the country and around the world. So glad to have Dave with us. He's also the father of a number of alumni who have also attended the Tepper School. So Dave has got certainly plaid to the bone, as they say at Carnegie Mellon. So glad to have you with us today, Dave. And Dave is joining with 4 of our alumni panelists. You're going to see them today, and they'll have a chance to share their insights with you. We have John Levinson from the class of 1980, Meredith Grelli from the class of 2010, Bharani, Rajakumar, who's from the 2011, and Asha Banks, who is just one of our recent grads. So a great alumni panelist for you today. I think we're going to have a wonderful discussion. So let me hand it over to Dave.
Thank you, John. I'm going to actually share my screen. If you give me 1 second to get there. Welcome to our many amazing alumni that have joined us today. The panelists that we have are really just amazing people, very, very willing to share and participate and volunteer. So I'm excited about that. But I see a lot of good friends that have joined the seminar today as well. John Coble, who's my classmate, Mark Onetta, who's on the Business Advisory Board, Chris Gassman, Doug Danforth, and a whole host of others. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I'd like to give you a little bit of update of the things that are going on. One of the biggest questions that I've gotten over the last few years that I've been at Carnegie Mellon is, how do I invest in Carnegie Mellon companies? And finally, we have a great solution for you all. We've formed a group called 99 Tartans, which are CMU alumni investing in CMU founders. You can go check it out at 99tartans.com. But not only do we give you the opportunity to invest in some of the coolest new technologies that are coming out of Carnegie Mellon, we've actually turned it into an educational experience for our MBAs. As part of the entrepreneurship track, that's right, you don't have to take game anymore. Woo! We allow the 3 MBAs to work on 99 Tartans as the partners in the fund. So they're getting real world experience investing in these amazing startups coming out of Carnegie Mellon. They've done such a great job of getting it professionalized. We're actually making, on average, 1 investment per week in 2021 in CMU startups. And it's very easy to join. It's free of charge. There's no membership fee. You don't have to invest in any deals. The minimum is $5,000 per deal. So it's really a low barrier to entry. However, you do need to be an accredited investor to be able to make an investment. We are working on longer term crowdfunding solutions so that we can have more people participate. But if you are interested in even just joining the meetings and seeing what's going on, you can become a member of the Swartz Center, and we'll make that easy for you to do. We've also built a really active alumni group in tech and entrepreneurship. There's over 5,000 members of this group. You can go check it out at cmute.io. There's entrepreneurs and technology professionals from every discipline at Carnegie Mellon that are involved in this group, and they do a tremendous amount of programming. So they have activities almost every week that you can join. And again, it's really an opportunity to connect with friends, people with similar interests, looking for jobs, that sort of thing. It's really great. So what we're trying to do with the Swartz Center for Entrepreneurship here at Carnegie Mellon is make CMU the destination of choice for aspiring entrepreneurs. In other words, we want to kick Stanford and MIT's ass. That plain and simple. And we want to create winning ventures. Jim Swartz and I have talked a lot about this over the years. Harvard has Facebook, Stanford has Google, Carnegie Mellon has, right? Who's that next venture? Maybe it's Duolingo. They're going to go public a little bit later this year, but we really need to, focus on creating these winning ventures. And if we do that, we will create literally dozens and dozens of valuable companies. And the only way we're going to get there is by the participation of you, our alumni. You should all be customers or suppliers or mentors or investors in our startups. So how are we doing against these goals? Well, there's a lot of measures out there, the university commercializations, the pitch books of the world, the Crunchbases of the world, and all of them have us in the top 10. Recently, the Bloomberg Business Week released their top 10. And as you can see, our friends at Stanford and MIT are at the top, and we were ranked number 6. But, this is CMU and there's going to be math. And if I look at UC Berkeley at number 4 and us at number 6, there's statistically no difference between them and us. So I'm claiming number 4. How about that? You with me on that one? So no, things are going great. And just a reminder of the history. Do you remember that the first computer ever on a college campus was actually in the basement of the old GSIA building that many of us went to school in? By the way, the new Tepper quad is absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't had a chance to visit, you got to come over. And I'm biased, but I think we have the best space in the building at the Swartz Center. So please do come and visit. But, our reputation has always been as the data-driven school, the school that applied engineering and science to business. And really, if you think back at some of the amazing things that have happened here, artificial intelligence was invented on the Carnegie Mellon campus back in the 1950s. Herb Simon, who we all know, Alan Newell, along with folks like Marvin Minsky at MIT. But the roots are here. And, quite frankly, conceptually, artificial intelligence was a great idea there, but we just didn't have the computing power or a way to get all the data that we needed to make it useful. So it didn't really become real until the late 1970s. And a lot of you may remember the 3 Mile Island incident in central Pennsylvania, where we had nuclear core meltdowns. A team of Carnegie Mellon researchers led by Red Whitaker sitting at the top of that robot and his team, really advanced robotics and artificial intelligence by saving lives, by having machines go in and help shut down the reactors and do all of the cleanup. So it was not until 20 or 30 years later that artificial intelligence and robotics started to become real. And then you fast forward another 20 plus years. I think a seminal event in the development of artificial intelligence and robotics is autonomous vehicles. And the DARPA Challenges of the mid-2000s were the event that sort of put this on showcase. The first event was in the desert. The second event was called the Urban Challenge in a city. Unfortunately, Carnegie Mellon, even though we went the furthest in the fastest time, by a technicality, lost to those suckers over at Stanford in the first challenge. But we came back in the Urban Challenge, which, by the way, was much more difficult and just dusted everybody. And what happened out of that was there a virtual who's who of today's autonomous vehicle world. Obviously, in the center there above the eagle is Red Whitaker. His hair is now white instead of red. But just to his left our right is Chris Urmson, who is was the founder of Google's Waymo and then left to start Aurora, which is leading companies in autonomous vehicles now. If I go way over to the left, I see in front of the gentleman in the red shirt, I see Rajakumar, a professor in the electrical engineering department that created a company called Automatica, which was bought by Delphi and then merged with another startup called Autonomy, which is another leader in that area today. Right behind him in the red is Tony Stentz, one of the founders of Uber ATG. And if I go over to the right and I count in the back row to the gentleman in the red with the gray hat, that's Brian Selesky, the founder of Argo AI. So you see where I'm going. Like everybody who's somebody in autonomous vehicles came from Carnegie Mellon. In fact, one last person, if you go to the left and you count 3 or 4 people over to the right, there's a blonde-haired guy named Dave Ferguson. And just this past week, his company Neuro launched in Houston Domino's delivery trucks that are completely autonomous. Dave got his PhD here at Carnegie Mellon back in the 2000s, and his company has raised nearly $2 billion at this point. And you'll see these, little delivery vehicles, completely autonomous, no safety driver in there, driving around Houston delivering these Domino's pizzas. So it's just amazing what has happened in this world. And so many people don't give Carnegie Mellon the credit that credit's due. Matt Rogers is one of our most famous alumni. And Matt and his team built arguably the greatest consumer product of all time, the iPhone. He built the first 4 iPhones, the first iPad. Then he left Apple to start his own company, Nest Labs, which is today the Google Home platform, right? We've had guys like Henry Thorne that are applying robotics to everyday products like infant products, like car seats and baby seats. We have guys like Howie Choset that are creating these snake robots. Here he is a year and a half ago on Jimmy Fallon's Tonight Show. His snake robot crawled up the leg of Jimmy Fallon. Just this past week, they announced a aquatic robot that can go into the ocean, into the bays, the seas, and they can check on pipelines. They can check on ships. It's just amazing the different things that are coming out of here. And you can all be a part of it, right? As I mentioned before, we have this 99 tartans, which allows you to see the newest startups that are coming out of Carnegie Mellon. And if you want to check it out, please go to 99tartans.com and sign up. So I wanted to give you sort of a quick update of things that were happening here, some really exciting things. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to our panelists with us today. There's just an amazing group of folks that have graduated from Carnegie Mellon over the years. They're all in the reunion classes that are with us today. And I'm going to have them each introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they're up to today. After we get through their introductions, I have a question for each of the panelists, but then we want to quickly get to interacting with those of you that are with us today so that you can ask questions of these people as well. So I'd like to start off with Asha Banks. Asha is a 2020 graduate of the Tepper School, and she was the Swartz Center Entrepreneur of the Year in 2020. Welcome, Asha.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Asha. I'm the founder and CEO of CheerNotes. We are a greeting card brand and retailer that amplifies artists, experiences, and cultures of diverse communities. Again, I started the company in 2020, along with graduating in 2020. So I'm excited to share that experience and perspective on today's panel. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Asha. I really appreciate it. Once you get to hear a little bit about what CheerNotes is, you'll be pretty excited about it. I'm going to introduce Bharani Rajakumar. Bharani is a 2011 graduate of the Tepper School. And while he was here, he founded a company called LearnBop, which he successfully sold to K-12, a publicly traded company in the ed tech sector. Bharani, please introduce
yourself. Hey, Dave,
yourself.
thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel. I'll never forget the first time I bumped into you and you generously offered to read the original business plan for LearnBop, even though it was 30 pages long, and that's just not how you do things. But yeah, like Dave said, the company that I started a while at Carnegie Mellon is called LearnBop. It was later acquired by a publicly traded company. Now the CEO and founder of a company called Transfer Inc. And we use virtual reality to create job training simulations and help people get jobs, and excited to help out and contribute any way I can today.
Thank you, Bharani. I'd now like to introduce Meredith Grelli, who's a 2010 graduate of Tepper. Meredith has created an experience company in a sector that you might not think you could create an experience company in. Meredith is the founder of Wigle Whiskey and Threadbare Cider and Mead. Meredith.
Hi, Dave. Hi, everyone. And I'm just so glad to be spending some time with some Tepperites this Saturday. So right after graduating, similar to Asha, we started Wigle Whiskey. And then about 5 years ago, started a second company called Threadbare Cider and Mead. So between the two of those, we've had the chance to change a few laws. We've opened 7 sites, a few restaurants across Western Pennsylvania, and distribute our spirits and ciders and meads in about 15 states across the country.
That's fantastic. Congratulations on the progress, Meredith. And last and certainly not least is John Levinson from the class of 1980. John has been a great friend of the Swartz Center. In fact, he made a donation that allowed us to create the Moonshot Conference Room in the Swartz Center, which is a beautiful space that helps our entrepreneurs meet with investors, meet with customers, meet with potential employees. John is more from the investment side of the entrepreneurial equation. John.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for having me. I wanted to explain that I've basically had 3 careers in investments leading up to where I am now. I started as an IT analyst, covering hardware and software companies at Goldman Sachs for 13 years, following my departure from GSIA in 1980. And then I moved on to asset management, where I ran funds and actually created a large hedge fund that invested in technology and technology-enabled companies. And since 2002, I've been investing directly into startup companies and early stage tech and tech applied companies, doing some over 50 deals, sometimes on the board, sometimes in a heavy advisory role, sometimes just as a passive investor. That's what I do.
Great. Well, thank you. As you can see, we have a group with a varied amount of experience, and I do have a question or two for each of them to get us started. But please start to think about questions you may have for the group as we go forward. I'll start with Asha because she's the most recent graduate and is doing something really cool. Asha is founded CheerNotes, and I'd love her to take maybe just a few minutes or so to explain what CheerNotes is and how it works. But also to talk about, all of the resources that were at Tepper and the Swartz Center and Carnegie Mellon that you were able to take advantage of to help you get started.
Certainly. So CheerNotes is more of a marketplace for inclusive greeting cards. So I started out just trying to test the idea of do people want a central place that they can go and find cards that speak to niche communities, which is for people like me. I know I had a frustration when buying greeting cards, not finding cards that spoke to my culture, spoke to my experiences, and having to go from store to store to even find anything that was relevant. And so what I found in my research was that other people were having the same experience, and it was beyond cultural diversity lacking in the greeting card aisle. So I started out partnering with different indie card companies, and we were more of a retailer for those different card companies. And then we started making our own designs. So now we're both curating the collection and creating our own cards to meet more moments that are missing, and kind of getting into wholesale as well. So expanding our efforts in that way, with the goal of helping more people connect authentically and feel seen when they shop. So the resources, I could go on and on about the resources that I used while in the program. And honestly, I would start with the network because before even applying to Tepper, I was able to connect with you, Dave. I was able to connect with at least 5 people who founded companies while in school. And that was really something that stood out to me for 2 reasons. One, that they were even responsive to my cold messages and wanted to talk to me about their experiences, but also that they were supported in this journey, which is pretty atypical within an MBA program, to start a business while in school or right after school, which is something I really wanted to do. So I kind of continued tapping into that network while I was in the program. I continued to be a part of that network after graduating. So on the side of answering those cold messages, but then also continuing to reach out to people. And that's been a great part of my experience. I would say being a Swartz Fellow was also a great part of my experience. Again, in the MBA program, you are surrounded by all these opportunities, and often it's easy to go from, I want to work on my own business after school, to, oh, wow, there's so many things I could do as well. And maybe I can just work on my business on the side. And so I didn't want to slip into that because I knew I wanted to use the MBA to bet on myself and dive into full-time entrepreneurship, which is something that I dreamed about since I was a kid. I started my first businesses when I was a kid. So I definitely appreciated the Swartz Fellowship, not only for the different opportunities to connect with people that were operating in entrepreneurship as VCs or as entrepreneurs themselves, but also having a cohort and a cross-functional cohort of people who wanted to make something out of nothing, that wanted to build on a vision that they had. And having that community was really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Asha was an amazing Swartz Fellow. The program has evolved. Both Bharani and Meredith were both Swartz Fellows as well, but the program has evolved to be interdisciplinary across campus. In the early years, it was just the Tepper students that were in the entrepreneurship track. And I think that's been a really great evolution to take advantage of the amazing people that are in the School of Computer Science or the School of Design or the Heinz School. And we have really interesting Swartz Fellows that are studying policy, and they bring that perspective to the table as well. Meredith, you graduated in 2010, and how has entrepreneurship changed for you over the last decade? And specifically, I hope you would focus on, you've been amazing in bootstrapping your businesses and, not going the traditional route of trying to raise, third-party money. But what I've seen with you is, and especially in the pandemic, is that entrepreneurial thinking is such a core survivor skill. How have you applied that over your experience in building your 2 businesses?
Yeah, I guess I'll kick it off though, if I could, with just, listening to Asha talk about her experience. And, I have this very distinct pleasure of being able to teach every once in a while at Tepper. And what Dave, sorry, Dave, not to embarrass you, but what you've created over the past decade at Tepper, this entrepreneurial ecosystem, is incredible. And for those of you who are like me, who maybe have been out of school for a decade or so, you would not recognize the entrepreneurship program that exists now from our days at Tepper. It is a whole different universe. And that hit home for me more recently than any time before, because I had the chance to judge the McGinnis competition this year. We had 15 semifinalist companies that were all so well imagined. Every single one of them was worthy of continued energy and investment, so much so that I immediately emailed Brian, Haight, and LJ, who Dave mentioned before, were the students this year, along with Alejandra and a couple other students who have been working on 99 Tartans, and said, get me signed up. I want to throw some money into these. So I would definitely go to 99 Tartans, because not only is it a chance to invest in these companies that some of them will be the next breakthrough companies, but it's also a chance to connect with other Tepper investors every month. So I think it's just a really fun way to connect and engage with the school. But so as far as how, this year has been wild for all of us. We have a lot of experiential, as Dave mentioned, on-site businesses as a part of Wigle and Threadbare. We have several restaurants, we have tasting rooms and bottle shops. And so we switched to everything, of course, every which way this year, including going digital. And we had done some legwork in the years leading up to change some laws so that we could ship alcohol. And that all sort of worked out for us fortuitously. Although we had never imagined when we were working, doing the lobbying work, that we were laying the groundwork for ourselves for a pandemic year. But as Dave mentioned, we have taken a more conservative route in terms of investment. We really have taken a long-term view of our businesses. So we haven't gone out seeking private equity in the way that a lot of Tepper businesses do and should do. And I think, we're a family business, and so we are positioned certainly for continued growth, but that kind of approach has also held us in good stead for years like this. We don't experience as much of the downside or the risk in a year like we've had this year. So we're actually coming out of this year feeling stronger than ever. And I think one of the things, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. So this is my last thought.
You're not rambling. Keep going. You're on a riff. There's a difference between a riff and a ramble, right?
Okay. My parting thought will be that, for me, entrepreneurship, and everyone in this room, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, experiences this. The wins, the victories, they come and then they go. And I remember hearing a quarterback talking about his Super Bowl victory and saying and then the next morning I wake up and think, how am I going to do that again? And I think we can all relate to that. But it's the really tough stuff for me that gives me the sustenance to keep going, because I can think back on it and think, we got through this thing last year. We can do it. We'll get through it again.
And the amazing thing about Meredith, they engage both their employees and their customers in sort of the wisdom of crowds in terms of creating new varieties of whiskey and having special things. So it's pretty, if you haven't had a chance, the next time you do come to Pittsburgh, you have to go to the distillery and to the restaurant and really experience it. It's awesome. Bharani, you had a real successful company, and you could have sort of laid back and rested on your laurels. But like most entrepreneurs I know, you get back in the game, and maybe you could share with us some of the emerging trends that you're seeing in ed tech and what gave you the inspiration to start this new company, Transfer.
Sure, I'd be happy to. But first, I got to say, give a shout out to a classmate who's on, I think, Chris Gassman. I heard he was on. So, hey, Chris. And I totally echo what Meredith was saying about you, Dave. I like I was saying earlier, I remember when you read my first business plan, and the Don Jones Center had been around for a little while, but it certainly isn't this cross-campus interdisciplinary behemoth that has become today, and obviously largely due to all the fantastic things that you've been doing, and love the Tepper Quad, and thrilled to donate to that and be on the bridge. So just super thrilled to be here. You asked this one question. I want to answer this too. Like, what has changed just overall in entrepreneurship? I think a fundamental thing that has changed in the last 10 years is the amount of money in funding startups. And, Dave, as you remember, back in the day, in 2011, it was still relatively hard. You basically had to go to Silicon Valley or New York City. And I think today investors are way more open to investing in other parts of the country. And that's changed. That was changing pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it is definitely and John's probably the better person to talk about this, but people are making investment decisions over Zoom these days. So I think that's a positive trend for entrepreneurs. With respect to the ed tech space, education in general is regarded as a fairly tough space because it is highly regulated. There's lots of government, and if you go the consumer route, it requires a lot of money, so that's risky. But due to because of the pandemic, even though I started my current company pre-pandemic, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of trends in distance learning, in hands-on learning, which is what we do using virtual reality, in terms of breaking the mold and thinking about how to do things differently. So for better or worse, previously, nursing schools, for example, you had to have a certain number of clinical hours in order to get your certification. And now a lot of that stuff has moved online. And so I think the world at large is trying to find newer and better ways to educate people, and not just educate people, but help them get jobs and get on career trajectories and career pathways. And, the term that one of our investors uses, jailbreak the university degree and the traditional higher ed kind of notion that higher ed is for everyone. And so if you are into teaching and learning and education and the future of prosperity, I think that this sector is going to be a hot one for decades to come.
Great. Yeah. Tell everybody a little bit about transfer. You alluded to using virtual reality and that training and education, but I think that's something people might be interested in.
Yeah, sure. So in summary, what we do is we create pre-apprenticeships in virtual reality. So you can put on the headset and you essentially do the job before you get the job. So right now we focus on middle skill jobs. So about 50% of the US economy does not require a 4-year degree, yet these jobs pay $50,000 to $100,000 a year. And they require more than a high school degree, which is why you have to have a little bit of specialized hands-on training. But we're focused right now on manufacturing. So you can think, in the world of autonomous vehicles, people are going to have to fix those vehicles. In terms of electrical vehicles, people are going to have to install these batteries into the vehicles and things like that, or repair the robots that are making the vehicles. In healthcare, it's nursing, phlebotomy, all that stuff. I mean, so the future of work, nobody knows what these jobs are going to be. They're going to need to be trained up. People will need to be trained up quickly, probably faster than committing to a 4-year degree. And so that's where this hands-on type of training simulations can add value.
Right. Very interesting. I've seen some of the simulations that Transfer does, and they're pretty cool. Just a reminder to our audience, we do have a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can type questions into that. I'm going to ask John Levinson a question, and then hopefully we'll start to get some interaction from the audience. John, you started off on Wall Street as an investment banker, right? The Darth Vader of the finance world, and you sort of pivoted into becoming a super angel investor with Westway Capital. And I'd really love to hear your observations on how things are different today with tech companies. And I know you recently made a meaningful investment in a Tepper alum company called Fifth Season. And if you're able to share sort of some of your thoughts as to why you made that investment, that might be interesting to the audience as well.
Okay, great. I think the environment for startups has never been better. And I believe that's true, like way beyond my ability to really comment on it. I can go back to 1980, okay, the beginning of the PC, and really the modernization of the whole IT infrastructure. But thinking back, there's never been a time like this. I think it's the most highly creative time in history ever. Change creates opportunity, and mega change culturally and technologically that's going on. It just has created this innovation that's happened to meet that challenge and that opportunity. And we have 3 wonderful examples on the panel today. But you look across healthcare and education, the 2 major industries that really didn't get automated or disrupted successfully over the years compared to other industries. that's all starting to happen in a big way, in part because of COVID and in part because of other things that have just started to come together. You've got green infrastructure. We're at the very beginning of completely revamping our infrastructure in a green way. I see it down here in Miami. I read plans today for some things that are going on in the city council. I'm sure it's happening all over the world. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of new ideas and new thinking that just is not possible by the big companies. They just don't get it. Finance, cryptocurrencies, blockchain, being embedded in every aspect of financial services, I believe, is the ultimate thing. We're just starting this. And then you've got all the other things that have been disrupted, but we just keep getting new ways of advertising, new ways to do retail. It's truly incredible. Never more an exciting time. And for the entrepreneur, it's never been easier to get support for your ideas, to get a team together. People are willing to take the risk. And sure, I'd consider going to a startup, says someone leaving business school, instead of going to work for a large company that's in the Fortune 500. It's a very acceptable thing to do. So it's easy compared to the past for entrepreneurs to get their ideas supported with a team. Support from accelerators is unbelievable. Mm-hmm. The first accelerator was formed in 1994 or something by a guy named Bill Gross called Idea Lab. Remarkable concept. I think that's the correct way to say it, that he invented that idea. Today, I read somewhere today there were 7,000. Well, I think that way understates the number in the world. There are 500 supposedly in Singapore alone. And those accelerators help cultivate entrepreneurs, helping them get ready for investors and flesh out their idea. And never has more money been available. It's not just the fact that we're in a world that's, as a Bain article I read 10 years ago laid out, it said the world awash in money, or the world awash in cash. And if you look at cash generation, cash going into the market, cash being printed, but it's unbelievable. And that money is something that can be deployed. But we've got something else that's hand in glove with that more money. It's the appetite for risk. As returns elsewhere have all come down, you see people much more willing to take risk than ever before. At least that I can take back for 40 years. In sum, it's a hugely fertile time to start a company. It's good news for the world economy because virtually all new ideas come from startups and small companies, not big companies. The big companies buy them once they're successful and then they mess them up. Allowing for another young, successful company to come along and fill that void. I want to pick up on something that Bharani said a moment ago, and I'll come at it a little differently. That is, for a company to be successful, you need an idea and a physical or not a physical product. It has to be a good idea, and it has to be demonstrably better than what's out there. We in the computer world, it was 10 times. If you had a 10x, 10 times better, that was good enough to give you a shot at becoming a successful company. But you needed 10. You couldn't be 5 times better. Had to be 10. Partly that's because of Moore's law, which erases that 10x over a short number of years. But whatever, you needed a 10x. The second thing you need to have was behavior change on the part of the user, be it the consumer or the corporate buyer. You needed them to be willing and able to take the risk associated with that new idea, implementing that instead of the old tried and true. COVID forced the behavior change to accelerate. And I know healthcare very well. It's been my focus for 15 years. In healthcare, telehealth, boom, overnight was accepted by the users and by the doctors. But more importantly, in healthcare, it broadened the medical establishment's community, collective mind towards accepting telehealth as a decent alternative with some benefits and surely some shortcomings versus an in-person visit. But there are tremendous benefits, part of which is you can talk to somebody right when their episode is happening, if it's an acute episode. I could talk a lot longer about that, but won't. What it did, though, in the medical industry is it made people much more willing to look at anything that was modern medicine, be it genetics, they just know the world is changing. Telemedicine is an example. We're now in favor and much more open to let's look at all these other things. So now you have companies, you have hospitals looking to use AI to improve the way their operations work. They never thought of that before. I mean, you could have banged on their door for years. Now they're all open-minded to it. And you see that in the revenues of these young companies.
And
it's a very exciting
Microsoft
time.
buying Nuance this past week, right? Nuance is a company that focuses on AI and healthcare. And by the way, Nuance was built on the acquisition of many Carnegie Mellon companies over the year, believe it or not. So very, very cool. So on that's some great insight. We do have a question from the audience, Chris Gassman, who Bharani had called out earlier, his 2011 classmate. He says, what opportunities are there for alumni to support innovators on opportunities highlighted over the last year, which includes climate tech, humans across the supply chain, cognitive inclusion? Bharani, take a shot at that. How can Chris support the ecosystem here?
Yeah, so I think what startups are always like resource starved, right? And so I think if you are not ready to join a startup and you want to be involved, a lot of times, especially in the early stages, introductions to startups that are doing things, for example, in climate change, that can be a really great way to develop a relationship if you can't invest, for example. If you're a subject matter expert in an area that the startup is focused on, that's always really appreciated because a lot of times the startups are generalists, right? Like they at least the operators, right? They may not be the expert. They're living on the edge and they're trying to break new ground, but they kind of depend on members of the ecosystem who have been playing in that realm for years or decades. And I think those are pretty easy ways to get hands-on in startups.
Yeah, absolutely. Asha, you had pointed out that even before you came to Tepper, you'd made 5 cold calls, cold emails, right? And people responded. That's helpful, right? We have a set of mentors that we list on the Swartz Center page as subject matter experts, and every alumni can lean in and help by answering emails. Asha, could you give us an example of one of those emails that someone answered that maybe turned into a longer term connection?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind actually is connected to the internship. So I worked for a company called Eightfold AI. One of our alums and a fellow Swartz fellow works for their company as well, Steve Meyer. And I wanted to get an experience in marketing, and I also wanted to get an experience within a growing startup. And now they are considered a unicorn. So I definitely was able to see a very, very high growth phase of a startup. But during that process of looking for an internship, I used a lot of cold messages to reach out to people and talk to them about entering a startup company, going over to the Bay Area and doing my startup. And I ended up talking to Steve and explaining what kind of experience I wanted to have. And he ended up kind of pitching Eightfold to me. So that was definitely one and we continue to keep in touch. I continue to work with Eightfold to this day. So that was definitely a long-standing relationship. And in the process, I connected with a number of alums who I also continue to keep in touch with.
Right. I think that pay it forward mentality is so important in the entrepreneurial world. It's important in life in general, but that's the way that entrepreneurs sort of are able to thrive and succeed by not only reaching out and taking advantage of the network, but when the call comes to them, doing exactly the same and paying it forward. We have a question from Andrea Kavuplis, and this is for Asha, Meredith, and Bharani. What do each of you find to be the hardest part of entrepreneurship?
Asha, you want to go first?
So what I've been experiencing in this new phase of full-time entrepreneurship specifically has been creating structure around everything, my day, the company, because my whole experience so far, I was formerly a chemical engineer, worked for 7 years within that industry. And everything was structured. My path was structured. I knew how to climb the ladder. I was doing it, whatever. And then with this, I'm like, okay, I know what I want to accomplish, but how do I know on every day that all these things that I'm doing are actually moving the needle? And oh yeah, I'm spinning all the plates myself, right? I'm a single founder, don't have a team. So it's been definitely constant iterations of figuring out, okay, how do I build this path that I'm trying to chart and also learn all of these different things to solve problems that I didn't even expect along the way.
I'll add to that, and got to say hey to Andrea, also a fellow classmate from 2011 is when we graduated. So I think the hardest part, there are a lot of hard things, but probably the two hardest parts that you'll deal with every single day, I mean, until you either sell the company or retire or whatever, is like Asha was saying, prioritization. I mean, there are always going to be a million trends going on, and to try to get really dialed into like the one or two things that you need to organize every single employee in the company around is really hard to do. And then to build that discipline around explaining to everyone like why this is important, how is it going to benefit you, how is it going to help us achieve this mission. So, building a culture is hard. Figuring out what your customers need is hard. Getting product market fit, all of that stuff is hard. But the hardest part is the day-to-day execution, because the day-to-day execution requires you to keep everyone focused every single day. That means you got to look at your KPIs every week, every month, every quarter, every year. And like, if you aren't showing progress against that, then, you got to kind of like figure out like, what am I doing wrong? Like, how do I get the train back on the tracks? And I would say every other problem is like a sub problem of that major problem, like making sure you're staying focused on achieving the target. Of course, figuring out the target is also hard. I'm sure Meredith has stuff to add to that as well.
And you have a capital intensive business, right? You have real estate, and you have to have plant and equipment, and you bootstrapped it. What's hard for you and different maybe than say Bharani's technology startup?
Well, although yes, it's capital intensive for sure. We've got warehouses full of thousands of barrels of whiskey, which makes us bankable, which is nice. We've got a lot of assets. But certainly, I think the challenges are pretty similar to what both Bharani and Asha are talking about. I mean, there's one of my favorite business articles of all time is an HBR article that describes the 5 stages of, it's actually dedicated to small business growth, but I think it's true. It sort of has universal truths in it. And it describes each moment of growth as a crisis point for the company. And I think internally, often it does feel like a crisis, even though it's a positive thing. And so for me, for my company, we grew from 0 employees to 175 employees in 5 years. There's a lot of points there to figure out those structures that we all take for granted when we work for larger companies that have had it figured out for a while. I think too, the other challenge I think for entrepreneurs that I see is, so there's this great quote that I heard someone use to describe the feeling of entrepreneurship, is that it's like getting to eat your favorite food, but having to have that for your meal every single meal and never being allowed to get up from that meal. And, now, the average full-time worker who's 28 to 35, they spend 2.8 years at a job, right? It takes, for even a really successful, fast-growing company, it just takes more time than that. And so, there will be times where you'll be sitting across from a fantastically talented person who's moving on to a new venture, and you're thinking to yourself, well, isn't that nice? They just get to go. I've got to keep trudging through this. for however many more years, until we get to the reality we're hoping to get to.
Right. Well, thank you, Meredith. Let's flip that, John. Since you're on the investment side, what's the hardest part about making a decision to invest in a company?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the hardest part about making the decision, I mean, you got product, you get people, you got financing. I can tell you the most difficult thing that I think a company faces as they're starting to get their product up and going is finding a customer that will pay them money for that product or service, and have it have that relationship based on something that you really want to base the company on. And what I mean by that is you have a service you want to sell to a company, and they say, that's great now, but you can do this now. We'd love you to do a little bit of this. And then the entrepreneur says, oh, of course, we're thinking about that. That's in our plan. Well, and all of a sudden they've promised a bunch of stuff, company or customer specific. And then they go try to get a second customer. And maybe that first customer isn't even paying them yet. They're just fooling around with it. And another customer says, I love that core idea, but we'd like to do this and take it down this road and have it available for these sets of people. And all of a sudden, the development side of the company gets totally diluted because of all this stuff from the field. Basically, you got to be true to yourself. You got to figure out what really you're going to do and be true to it and say, we're delivering this. And those are all great ideas, and we hope to get to them. But this is the value proposition because that's what other people want as well. I think I've seen companies stumble on this so many times. And it happens after I invest, unfortunately, because I invest before products are out. But that's a huge stumbling block.
It is. I've learned over my entrepreneurial career, the ability to say no is incredibly important. And that ties back to what Bharani was saying, which is you've got to brutally prioritize because you cannot do everything that could potentially do. And so you have to pick the most important things. Well, listen, we have an opportunity to actually interact with the audience on a more personal level. We have some breakout rooms that are going to be available to us. And I think John and his team are going to assign each of our entrepreneurs and panelists today to a room, and folks will be able to go back and forth between rooms. So, John, can you share with us how this is going to work?
Yes, the link is in the chat, and you should have already received it when you registered for it. So we're going to actually close this down and go to a separate Zoom room with breakout rooms. So click on the link there and leave this room, and go there. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.